Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Logbook podcast, where we uncover the strategies and insights driving extraordinary business growth. Today, we're joined by Christopher Stauffer, a software consulting firm that has been transforming the digital space for over 2 decades. From launching Deloitte's first client website at age 22 to overseeing InfoSpace Mobile's dominance in the ringtone industry, Chris has seen it all, from both the engineering and marketing side of things. Under his leadership, Stauffer has grown into a powerhouse consultancy company serving companies like SpaceX, billboards, and even major universities, while earning prestigious recognition, including a Clio Award. His unique approach of bridging the technology and marketing gap has led to extraordinary successes, including a viral Facebook campaign that has registered 2 million users without any media spend. Chris, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Zach. Pleasure to
Love to
be
have you
here.
on. Cool. So I think perhaps like the best place to start this, we've obviously been acquainted a little bit, talked on that side of things, but would love to hear a bit about like how you even got started to the space because you've been doing this for like quite a while. Like 22, you were building like client websites for like Deloitte, and then now you're obviously working with companies such as like SpaceX, Billboard, and like a lot of universities too.
Well, I'll kind of give you a little bit of the company's evolution, which is a little bit of my career evolution as well, kind of bringing me up to where we're at today. So I started playing with computers when I was around 8. Lucky for me, I grew up next door to a nuclear engineer. It was my next door
Wow.
neighbor, and my mom was a computer science teacher at the local community college. So I started kind of playing with computers when I was really, really young. When I went off to college, I always knew I wanted to go into business, but I didn't really know which type. When
Mhm.
I found out that you could end up getting a degree as a hybrid, where you were part business person and
Yeah.
part software engineer, that to me seemed like the place to go. So from there, that's basically where I ended up starting at Deloitte, where I helped sell their first ever web project for a client, which was just a ton of fun. And one of the reasons I want to bring that up today is probably the most interesting thing about that is none of us really knew what we were doing at the time. And there really wasn't a lot of definition of, these are the marketing guys, these are the engineering guys, these are the designers, these are the developers. None of that was really figured out like at all. And so, really what they did is they just kind of locked us in a room and said, figure out like how to make it work. And so we were all kind of marketing guys and engineers, really at the same time, because none of those roles had really been defined. Uh,
Interesting.
as the market continued to evolve, I ended up getting my first gig for Stauffer as an independent at Toshiba America, and that was really the first time that I really realized that the web really was marketing. So
Mhm.
the guy that I'm still good friends with to this day, even though he is now retired, a gentleman named Nick Roberts. So he was one of my first champions on the marketing side, and he was our VP of marketing. And, kind of going into that, like bridging the gap between, marketing engineering.
Mhm.
Back then, since we were still kind of making it all up as we went along, uh, we would just kind of get pulled into the room, and Nick all of a sudden started using all these like marketing concepts and marketing terms and things like that.
Yeah.
And I was looking around in the room and I realized I was the only person in the room that didn't have a degree in computer science. Like every single guy in the room with like a master's in, software engineering or electrical computer engineering or something like that. And most of them didn't really completely understand exactly what Nick was driving at, during a lot of those conversations. So that was really kind of key for me because that was really when I started to realize working as that, kind of liaison between the marketing guys and the engineers was really something that, I could really get into, you know,
Mhm.
as the career continued to evolve. We then took on a bunch of different projects where we were working in that same kind of cross-functional, kind of team. You
Mhm.
alluded to, earlier me moving on to InfoSpace. Well, InfoSpace, when it came to the marketing aspect, really was a bit of a game changer for me because that was really one of the first times where people really started showing me the math and the ramifications of what I was doing. And that was when I really
Mhm.
started coming to that realization that, my engineering can be amazing, but if the marketing is off, no one
Yeah.
cares. It doesn't really matter, you know.
Mhm.
But, the same was true in the inverse too. If my marketing was amazing and my engineering wasn't on point, then we would lose a lot of money as well. And,
Yeah.
InfoSpace really helped me understand that because I was responsible for the math. And when we'd have a
Yeah.
little, blip in the engineering, well, you'd see that in the math. And we'd have a little blip on the marketing side. Well, you'd see that in the math too.
Yeah.
Really when I realized that you've really got to do both, effectively
Mhm.
to have the internet work for you.
Yeah, so you've been on like both side of like the spectrum with obviously like the marketing side of things, like getting into those conversation with like a lot of these marketing oriented type people. And then there was obviously like what was more like your bread and butter, like where you started, like developing engineering, etc. And you somewhat like saw that disconnect where like these teams, if they didn't collaborate, as you were mentioning, there would just be like these little gaps that would just like show up here and there, and you could be able to like somewhat see it with like data metrics that if you're not effectively communicating with both of these teams, it's going to reflect in like your outcome, like the output, the results. But if you're able to bridge that, effectively communicate, then that's another like completely different story. So I guess like one of the questions I would have is we often see a lot of like these marketing team and like even like just general team like as a whole like having these issues between like having that communication between both of them, like they have like a lot of ideas around like what they want to like implement, what they want to do, but again there's always that struggle of being able to somewhat like explain it in like a really easy to understand like manner. I think like one of our last conversation we were speaking, and when you have someone in marketing, we're going to talk about like target audience, and then when you're talking about someone like engineering, development, or anything, they're going to talk about groups. And then there's like that big difference where if you're not able to talk and like somewhat express yourself clearly between these two groups, you're gonna have like a lot of like issues. So I guess how do you actually about to go about translating those ideas into like something that becomes like concrete and actually drives like results?
I think one of the most important aspects of that is really the collaboration.
Yeah.
So things that I did some thinking about it since our last conversation, and one of the realizations that I've had over the years is that getting those people in the room talking and going through exactly what the plans are and what the strategies are, and making sure that it's not set up in what I'll refer to as an assembly line, but you've actually got the people actually collaborating together in the room at the same time. And in some instances, like, going back to your target audiences, kind of concept. Well, I didn't really understand that early on as an engineer uh, until, really Nick started help explaining it to me. Kind of going back to Toshiba for a sec, there we had very distinct offerings between our business to consumer model, which is what we were doing to sell laptops to, normal people, like you and I, versus their business to business model, which is what they were doing to sell laptops to like, people like Oracle and things like that. And
Mhm.
going through a lot of those requirements gathering sessions where I was in the room with the marketing guys, listening to them come up with the strategies, that was really the first time that it really kind of clicked in my head that these different groups of people were really just different and we had to treat them differently. We
Mhm.
had to design the systems differently. But at the same time, I came up, on the engineering side and we were always taught, when you think about groups, you're thinking more about like access control rights and what things like that do you do? Well,
Mhm.
making sure that you've got someone in the room that can kind of help make that translation and kind of explain to that young engineer that to a certain extent they kind of can be treated in the same fashion.
Mhm.
When the marketer is thinking through what their strategy is, they can create their market segments and things like that. And then they just need to be really clear when communicating to the engineering team that this is the way that we're going to treat those individuals differently. And these are the different things that help make, those people tick,
Mhm.
and with that clear explanation, it really helps the engineers then go through and design the system that's gonna help meet the needs of those audiences better. But just
Yeah. So
really just communicating, I think is the key part there.
yeah, that's sort of like where I was getting. Because if you're able to have like remove that gap, bridge that disconnect, because you have to understand that you're dealing with like the same concepts, just explained in like a different manner. It's seen like a different way, like as you're mentioning with these examples. But if you're able to like bridge that, be able to somewhat act, I wouldn't say a translator for like language in any way, but somewhat understand like how they perceive like their own lingo and like how it's applied to your context, then you can definitely have like much more like an impact. You're able to understand that. And again, it goes back to collaboration. Like you need to be getting in the rooms with those people, understand their ideas, ask for clarification. Because if you're just trying to understand without any idea what they're saying, it's just not going to work. You're going to play guessing games. It's going to impact like the output that you deliver. And then there's always going to be that miscommunication that this is what we were looking for. Like, oh, this is what I understood that you wanted. And that's like exactly like from what you guys are doing, like helping to bridge that in a way. And I guess that even ties back into even like the culture component that you really have to create a culture of people that want to really like learn to like improve, like educate themselves, like get better like every single day. And like even in our last conversation, I think you had mentioned this that you do like to like mentor like some of like your team members, like really help them get to that next level. And I feel that's something not everyone does actually takes the time to do when you grow a company. And I feel that's like really important. And then like when you try to like get your teams to actually like collaborate together, is there like any like strategy that you take versus like as you mentioned having like an assembly line and then just throwing them into like the bunch? Do you have a collaborative approach that you take to do that or?
Yeah, I do actually. I think one of the most important things that I've learned over the years is that concept of having JAD sessions. So what JAD stands for
Okay.
is Joint Application Design. So the
Mm,
theory is that you're getting people from different disciplines in the room at the same time, and then you're collaborating on what the overall solution is. So when I had mentioned before that the assembly line doesn't really work. So in the 20 early 2010s, I worked as a subcontractor for a lot of different marketing and branding firms. And I want to draw a very stark contrast. One of them that I worked with, what they would do is they would go off, have all their marketing sessions, all of their requirements gathering sessions, all their strategy sessions with just the marketers. And then
mm,
they would then take what they made up and turn those or package them up into design comps. And then they would give us the design comps and say, great, now go build it. Now, another contrast was a guy that, did serve as a mentor for me, a guy named Jose. What Jose did was he actually invited the engineers into the conversation. So he would actually bring me, kind of representing the software engineering side of things, Barrett, who would kind of be more like an information architect, and then Jose was kind of the creative director. And we would all be in the room with the client. Great example of that is we did some work with Alice Waters's Edible Schoolyard Foundation, which was formerly known as the Chez Panisse Foundation, a very famous restaurant up in San Francisco. And we actually had the engineers, the designers, and the UX designer in the room with Alice while we were actually defining everything. So when we entered that room, there really wasn't a whole lot other than, well, we know we need to build a website and it's going to support this new, vision that Alice had, but we didn't really know what it was. And so
yeah.
in the room, I sat there, as the engineer, listening to Jose interview Alice and really getting to what I'm going to refer to as the why. Like, why
Mm,
are we doing this? It wasn't just, hey, techie, go do this. It was, here is why we are doing this. Here are the buttons we're trying to push, with those different target audience members. And we were actually a part of, I'll call it the marketing strategy part of the conversation. So
mm,
we were there understanding the why. That way,
yeah.
when it came to the actual solution, we weren't just told to go do something, we actually understood why we were doing it. And in the
Hmm.
process of making sure that we understood the why, that kind of gave us all from engineering, marketing, whatever group you're talking about, that North Star and that set of goals to go after.
Yeah.
Because in that assembly line fashion where we're just kind of given a comp and told to go do it, you're not really truly harnessing the brain power of those engineers. And they're not going to be giving you different, concepts and different ideas because, well, to be blunt, they were never asked, you know,
Yeah.
versus when you're in that joint application design kind of paradigm, you've got a bunch of different people looking to solve the problem from a bunch of different angles. And to me,
Love that.
that concept of solving the problem from a bunch of different angles, well, that just you just end up creating a better solution that way. Because we all think
Yeah.
differently, and the ability to cherry pick those ideas,
Hmm.
all those different disciplines and all those different lenses, well, that ends up creating a better product in the long run.
Yeah, and I like the approach of having somewhat like the marketing team, like everyone with like a client, because I guess there's like somewhat like that disconnect where you're gonna have like a marketing team maybe take notes and like what the client wants or like explain it in like their own words, like what the why is, like what they're trying to accomplish. But again, it's like in their own perspective, like what they are hearing from the actual client. But once you bring in like these different people, different department, different perspective, they're going to see something different that you might have not seen like whatsoever. And I guess going back to your point, it just helps you create better products because if you just have one person giving their own opinion as far as what a client wants, what the end goal is, you're missing an entire disconnect that might be like mistranslated in a way when it gets to like the developing team, engineering team. They're going to create something out of looking at the information you gave them that could be totally not something like what the client wanted. So the client could explain to you something from like a development standpoint, engineering standpoint, like what they're trying to create, like how it looks, feels, functions. But the marketing people, they might not be able to like emphasize that, like explain it. But if you have everyone into one, it's much more easier to like understand that message and bring these like different perspective, if I'm getting that correctly.
Yeah, and I want to add one other big aspect to that, and that is that no one, and I don't really care who you are, is ever going to develop what I'll refer to as a totally fully baked spec. There's always a little bit of holes, and
Of
there's always
course.
little I's that we forget to dot and T's that we forget to cross. Well, when you really truly understand the why, when that engineer is going through and building it, they're thinking about why they're building what they're building, and then they're able to fill in those gaps because they understand what the purpose of the product is that they're building. Versus
Hmm.
when they have those holes in the spec, but they don't really understand the why, they might end up filling in that hole incorrectly. And then
Yeah.
they end up making a decision absent knowledge and information that is going really down the bad path. And then
Hmm.
because they made the incorrect decision, you then have to go through later on
Same
and
cycle.
rework that problem, in QA. And
Hmm.
so a lot of companies sometimes they think that they're saving money by not necessarily including, engineering in some of those early conversations. When in reality, what they're doing is it's going to cost the same, if not more. They're just
Hmm.
shifting that cost to the back end, to the end, of
Yeah.
where, you're cleaning it up once you're testing it. You're not cleaning it up during the planning part.
Yeah.
Hopefully that, kind of makes sense because somebody's going to have to
Yeah.
make decisions, and the question is, do you want those decisions made by an engineer after the marketers have left, or do you want those decisions made in a collaborative fashion up front?
Yeah.
I would
And
argue up front's better.
probably. Yeah, because you just have to go through that same cycle over and over and yet and again, there's still that disconnect every single time where the marketing team is going to tell them something after the client provided feedback or anything. And again, you're just like continuously like trying to improve the product without having a clear why. And I feel like that's really important. Like what you mentioned with the why, I feel is really interesting because like when I think about the why, the vision, I'm thinking about a marketing component. I'm thinking branding, like how people perceive something. But it's as important, like even when you're in the engineering side of things, that they need to understand like why you're doing something, what the end goal is. Because from like a technical standpoint, they might have like a completely different vision on how to accomplish something. When the marketing team are obviously emphasizing something else like completely. And I feel like again, that's like really where that major disconnect is again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't think about. Like, I'll give you one really stupid example. You know,
Sure.
when I share something with you from a web page, well,
Hmm.
a really thoroughly designed web page, you'll see a nice title, and then you're also going to see a really pretty image that kind of matches that title. So in the design of the application, that's, what we refer to as like an OG image or an OG title. It kind of started with Facebook back in the old days because that was how you get those pictures to show up when you shared a Facebook post.
Yeah.
Well, when you're going through and talking through like what the marketing plan is, that was a common thing that people would just constantly forget. And they would never think through like in the specification to write out like, well, this is something that you're going to see when you share a given web page.
Hmm.
Well, if you're talking through with people about the fact that this application that's going to be developed is probably going to be used by a bunch of young people that are constantly working on their phones. Well, now all of a sudden the engineer might start asking a question like, hey, do you guys see this, being shared a lot on mobile? Because I hear you mention mobile, 3 or 4 times, and I know this is going to have to work on mobile. Have we thought through like, what the view is going to look like when we share it on a phone?
Hmm.
And that to me, it kind of happened a little bit on accident, if that kind of makes sense. And then eventually that just became like something standard that we would ask. But originally, that was just a question that one of my engineers brought up during one of those JAD sessions, where the marketing guy
Hmm.
was talking about how, we're going to be targeting a lot of young people. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff on the phone. We're really hoping people are going to be sharing, the articles and things like that that we're writing. And then that just kind of logically came out of that discussion. Whereas that might not
Yeah.
be something necessarily that a marketer thinks about, straight out the gate. They may not think
Yeah.
that you've got to write a little bit of different code, to get it to work correctly, on the phone. They know
Yeah.
who that target audience is, but they may not necessarily know about that small point of execution, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and I think like going back to like the our previous conversation, one thing that you mentioned that really stood out, which I thought was like really interesting, was someone like creating like web pages or like certain like keywords based on like what someone would search. Like from a marketing standpoint, like it totally makes sense. But if it's not like correlated back to like the engineering department, they are not going to create these web pages to improve the efficiency of your marketing in the first place. And it goes back to like your point. Like someone in engineering might see a certain standpoint, marketing thing, like the marketing team might see like something as well, like totally different. But if they don't communicate together to actually make that happen, then there's going to be like this major disconnect. And I really love like the story that you were mentioning where you like A/B tested like a lot of things. I think it was for like college application, if I'm not like totally mistaken. Could you share like a bit about that story?
Yeah, kind of going back into the math of conversion rates. So, another big, mental shift for me was when I had a client explain to me the concept of customer acquisition cost,
Hmm.
which to a large extent is really just how much does it cost for me to buy a customer, and I know some people don't necessarily think of it that way, but when you really think about it, if you were to say, go spend $1 million and then you got 1 million customers, effectively what you did is you paid $1 per customer for each customer to buy. That is
Yeah.
what you did is you spent $1 million and you got 1 million customers. Well, we were working on a lead capture system for a client that primary goal was to bring in and sell and market leads to different universities. So when working on that project, that was one of the first times when we really started working with what's known as A/B testing. So what A/B testing is when you swap out different elements on a given page to see whether or not the new elements on that page can help convince someone to sign up.
Mhm.
So the specific example that you were referencing earlier was where we were basically trying to get students to fill out forms to apply to different online universities. And so what we did is we went out and had the marketing department pick 100 individual photos that we thought could be the right photo to show on that landing page. And so what we did is we set up the software to where we drove 1,000 visitors to every single one of those individual images. And then we had the database, kind of going back to the computer scientist side of this, we had the database record how many people filled out that form. And after we threw 1,000, clicks at every single one of those images, we then went back and analyzed the stats of that. And we basically picked the top 10. Once we
Mhm.
had the top 10, we then went out and threw 10,000 clicks at each one of those images. And then after we went through 10,000 clicks, it became really, really apparent that one particular image really did resonate, with students and really made them think, this is where I want to go to school. And the simple concept of testing out those 100 different images ended up increasing our conversion rate by 20%. Just that, just the change of the image.
Yeah,
And it was
it's
just
a
an
lot.
image of a woman walking to class. We refer to her as backpack girl. She was
Yeah,
just walking off to class. And just swapping out that image alone was 20%. So when we kind
it's
of
crazy.
mixed in that concept of a marketer saying, to the programmers, hey, I don't really know which image is actually going to convert the best. All the images that we picked, they were all like on brand and they were all, nice looking and everything like that. But it's really hard for a marketer to know like what is going to resonate best. And
Hmm.
rather than, going back to the 50s where Don Draper is, going to come save the day with his magical, single item pick,
Yeah,
we really got to mix in the statistics to figure out like are those items that Don picked, are they the right ones? And
yeah,
we could prove it with math. And by the time we were done with that campaign, we actually ended up increasing the conversion rate by 285%. So we took a company that was generating leads for a living, that was breaking
yeah.
even, and simply by swapping, the headline out,
Mhm.
the image out, the colors of the buttons, whether or not it's swiped left to right, or whether it
Yeah,
faded in or faded out, just by just tweaking and tweaking and tweaking those individual elements, and then testing with math what the stats were, you know, we basically made that company profitable. And the company
yeah,
itself had like, I think they had like 150 people working at it, and there were like three that were the ones working on this project. Like it was just amazing to me, like
yeah,
just the results that came out of that exercise. And to me, that was just a really, really good example of really, kind of merging that engineering side, and the creative side, both. Because the creatives were
yeah.
the ones kind of making up like, dude, let's try this, dude, let's try that, dude, let's try that. But the engineers were the ones bringing kind of like the math to the
The
equation,
math to it. Yeah,
and then figuring out like how are we going to track all this stuff? How do we track the conversion rates? And making sure that we had good reporting that came out of it so that the client could make those judgment calls as to, which images we were going to keep, and which
yeah.
images we were going to kill, what headlines resonated and, which ones fell flat.
Yeah, I mean, even just like 20% out of swapping like an image, like just there, you mentioned you guys were doing like tests, sending like 1,000 clicks, like just that's 200 people more for like a test of 1,000 people actually like submitting like a form. That's a lot. And then if you think about 285%, that's crazy. Like that's an insane amount just out of making like a few tweaks. And then I feel that's interesting going back to obviously what you were saying that like the like engineering side of things, we're looking more like the math side of things, like looking at the statistics, seeing like what performs better. And there is somewhat seeing it in like their own lingo, like they're looking at math, like what is higher? Am I seeing a higher percentage? This is working better. And then you're able to go back to the marketing team, they might present it like a certain way, saying like, hey, like this page, like web page, like they perform, like we got way more people that visited it. And when the marketing team looks at it, it's like, okay, well, this is clear. This creative outperformed this one by like 4x. Like let's run this one instead. And again, just about having that communication, getting their ideas. And I mean, I'm not even sure if it's the marketing people that thought about like the A/B testing, or if it's the engineering team that thought about, hey, let's make 1,000 different like web pages, or like however that process worked. But it led to like a lot of growth just by collaborating together here.
I was going to say it did lead to a lot of growth, and it was very much a collaborative process. You know,
Hmm.
the marketing guys were the ones that, brought to the table the concept of like, I want to have the ability to try out, all of these different images. But the
Yeah.
engineering guys were the ones that went out and actually found tools off the shelf that could actually, accomplish the stuff.
Yeah.
At the time, once we figured this out, it was just like an amazing amount of power. And, just that concept of taking a company from break even to making a lot of money was just, it really did open my eyes a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think a lot of marketing people would know how to create 1,000 different web pages, send different traffic to like all these different places. So you did need like that engineering team to be able to like make that happen. And I guess like one other question I'd be really curious about is when you look at like collaboration, there is obviously that strategy of obviously having like those JAD like session like meetings, like having everyone collaborate together, get with a client. But there like outside of that, there is still like the component where you most likely have to use software. Like you most likely have to like collaborate together through like tools, integration. Is there like a certain type of like when you look at a platform, if you look at it more from like a technical side of things, is there certain things that you look for in a platform that you know like, hey, like we need this type of platform because it's going to integrate really well with what our marketing team is going to do and it's going to make your communication like much more effective or
Well, one thing that I would say is, we have standardized on a platform called Figma, that
Mhm,
we
yeah.
are a very, very large fan of. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Figma, effectively what it is it's kind of like Google Docs,
Yeah.
but for graphic designers. So it gives our designers the ability to go in and mock up layouts for the way that pages work. And,
Hmm.
kind of going back to that, collaborative concept. Well, back in the day, the designer would design it in Photoshop, and then they would throw it over the wall to the marketing executives, and then they would throw it over the wall to the engineering executives. And it was
Yeah.
just kind of like, what do you think, guys? And then the designer is kind of like trying to collate, everybody's thoughts.
Feedback, yeah.
In Figma, we've literally had sessions where the engineer is in the design comp, making comments, moving things around, with the designer in there taking what the engineer did, tweaking it a little bit more to make sure that it was on brand, with the marketer in the same exact file changing the copy, on the design asset itself. And so we could
Yeah.
literally have all the different disciplines in there, editing a file, putting comments on the file all at the same time, keeping it all in one file. And to me, that's
Hmm.
that's just genius, because
Yeah.
I joke all the time about how I don't make things for me. I make things for other people. I'm making it for that marketing executive, upstream. I may be making it for an engineer downstream, but we've got all those people in that same file, with the ability
Mhm.
to comment and reply to comments and, tweak different elements. And heck, the thing even generates code at this point, if you do it
Yeah.
right. So I don't know. I think that concept of any tool that can really enhance the communication and the collaboration, is really key.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because it helps you be like not only collaborate, but do it in like real time where you're making tweaks to everything in like action, like real time. Like you're getting feedback, you're tweaking something. It's less of just like, hey, I think we should be doing this, getting feedback from everyone before putting it into action. But with tools like Figma, for example, you're able to actually go in, make the adjustments, hear feedback from everyone in the same place. And as you make new adjustments, get more feedback and tweak, 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 tweak until that you think you have like a good like end product. And there's like
Right.
a lot of tools out there that do that. Like I know like in-house we use a tool called Missive. It's more for like email communication. But if we have anyone on our team like, hey, like, what should we be doing from this? Do you have any feedback, insights? You can tag people. It's like Slack in a way, but more for like collaboration. And I think that's like really important to have like these tools within your organization because it's important to have like these one-on-ones, like chat sessions you mentioned. But a lot of people work like remote, like companies are remote nowadays, and sometimes you need to have like these types of tools. And even when you look at even the like evolution of like AI, like it's beginning to be like everywhere. Like everyone is talking about AI. There's misconception that people think it's going to take over the world. There's not going to be any jobs left. And then there's the other component of people that are actually realistic, like myself, that it's just like, okay, it's going to improve your workflow. It's going to help you be more efficient. And I guess like that's one of the questions like I would have for you when you look at maybe the next like year, 2 year, because I don't want to say 10 years, that's a bit too far ahead. Is there certain things that you see like AI or just general like collaboration between marketing, engineering teams that you think will evolve with that coming into play or?
One of the things that we're starting to see, and this is a very, very recent thing, is we're
Okay.
starting to see marketers beginning to use generative AI as a fashion of making sure that their specs and things are more thorough and more thought through. So you can actually have generative AI write specs for you in some
Mm,
instances. And the real trick is making sure that that you're putting in as much information as you can into the prompt so that it's generating, the correct things. And then once
mm,
it's spit its output, going through that output and making sure as the marketer that you actually do like, everything that it made up. Because in some
yeah.
instances, it's not perfect yet, and it's still going to
Sure.
generate some things that are, well, that will send your team, down a rabbit hole the wrong way. So you still want to make sure and not be like completely dependent on it, but
Yeah.
you can kind of think of AI in many respects as another team member that's helping contribute, to the conversation.
Hmm.
One particular client that I have that's really, really heavy on the marketing side, but really, really light on the technology side. What it did is it started getting that marketer to start thinking about uh, non-functional requirements, and things like that, because that individual hadn't necessarily thought through, maybe it's a good idea to tell the engineer how much traffic, we're going to expect.
Mm.
Is this new campaign that we're going to be working on? Is this going to generate, you know, 10 clicks a day? In which case you can, get away with a really simple, server setup and stuff like that. Or
Yeah.
are we gonna be talking like, 20 million clicks in an hour for a Super Bowl campaign? Well, the way
Yeah.
that you're going to set up the servers are going to be, just a team's different, if you're talking about, 20 million,
Yeah.
visitors an hour. And so just that whole concept of going through and asking AI to review your specification and provide feedback, it gave that marketer some insights that he hadn't really thought through all the way, and it got him
Yeah.
thinking about some of those non-technical or those non-functional specifications, like, how much traffic am I actually going to generate here? And so when that conversation did occur with the engineers, it was a more thorough conversation because he had already thought through, a lot more aspects, that without AI, he might not necessarily have thought about.
Yeah, and like now that you mention it, like I'm somewhat seeing it as a way, I wouldn't say like translate, but in a way like it helps you perhaps convey like your ideas into a way that's going to be understandable to like an engineering team. But out of doing that, you somewhat get to understand like, okay, like this is what it's translating into. They're going to understand like a general basic of like what I'm trying to create. And then you can obviously optimize it to make sure it fits your spec, as you mentioned, and is exactly what you have in mind. And then when you have the engineering team have a look at that, it's much more clear for them to understand, like, okay, this is what they're trying to accomplish. So it serves as like a communication tool in a way. It helps you like collaborate, express your ideas in a way that's easily understandable for the other side of things, if I'm getting
Yeah,
that
I
correctly.
mean, to a large extent, it's kind of like what I was saying. It's just like another team member that's helping you brainstorm ideas, and it's
Yeah.
it's helping you review your thoughts and make your thoughts more thorough, and hey, we could all use a little help on that side.
I agree. And again, it's just like helping you be more efficient. Like as I was saying, with like just being more efficient in like anything that you do, and then it saves you time, so you don't have to do like all these little changes before you even like get it to market. Like you can address these from the start. It's like another layer of collaboration in a way. We're able to address that first. I guess like one of the things I'd be curious about, like just like looking ahead, is there anything that like excites you as far as like the future of like marketing and like engineering collaboration? Is there any things that you're seeing that you're like, this is going to be really like a game changer? Like I know you obviously mentioned you guys use like Figma pretty often. There's like AI that used for collaboration, but I'd be curious there.
I mean, one of the things that I do think the rise of prompt engineering and people getting really, really good at that
Yeah.
uh, is going to really start to make a big difference. Um, I heard an interview a couple months ago that really kind of made my mind spin, and something I want to share with you as well. So people talk about, generative AI going through and replacing jobs and things like that. Well, one of the things I want people to think about is the whole concept of marketing is to be able to, put your products and services in front of people and differentiate as to why, your products or services may be better, than the competition's. Well, if
Mm.
everyone's kind of using the same generative AI, well, then what that's going to do is it's going to generate the same thing. So
Mm.
if I
Yeah.
go say, go make me a website, and then you, Zach, say, go make me a website, and it's the same algorithm, it's going to make the same
Same
thing.
output.
So you get the same thing, I get the same thing. And if we're both, the chief marketing officers of our company, we both just completely failed because we didn't differentiate ourselves from the competition. We just literally created the
Yeah.
exact same thing that the competition created. So really
That's
where that
interesting.
that value is going to come in at this point is going to be how do I articulate the vision? So when I'm going
Mm.
through and telling it to create a website or to create a page, what are the adjectives that I'm putting in there? What are the different things that I'm going to do to train the AI's voice so that my voice sounds different than your voice sounds? So
Yeah.
it's going to kind of turn the marketer a little bit into kind of like a conductor, for lack of a better way of putting it, where you're instructing the machine to do things in different ways. And the way that I may instruct the machine to generate my website versus the way that you may instruct the machine to do your website, well, that skill is going to come down in that prompt engineering. So how do
Mm.
I make it different? You
Yeah.
know,
I never thought about
words
that
I
creative like
use,
side of things.
and what are the
Yeah.
words you use, to make it. And the same
Mhm.
concept of engineering, when you say build a website, are you going to say build a website with WordPress? Are you going to say build a website with Drupal? Are you going to say
Mm.
build a website with Builder? Because it's
Yeah.
gonna it's gonna need to figure out like how does that work? What kind of code am I going to generate? What
Mm.
software libraries am I going to use? What payment processor am I going to integrate with for e-commerce? People think about like, oh my God, it's going to replace all these jobs. I don't necessarily think it's going to completely eliminate jobs. It's going
No.
to place, in my mind, a lot more emphasis on the creative side of things and
Yeah.
how are you describing things? Going back to the college example, that image that you're showing on the landing page, how
Mm.
did you describe that image as the marketer?
Mm.
How did you describe it?
Yeah.
When you were going to go through and do it, how did you describe it? Did you describe it in a way that generated an image that's going to resonate with people? Or
Mm.
do you describe it incorrectly? Or were you smart enough to tell the system to integrate A/B testing and that you want it to generate 100 different images? And you see
Yeah.
where I'm going with this.
Mm.
Because you still have to conduct the orchestra. The orchestra is not going to play itself.
No,
So
I love the way you framed it because I never thought about it from like a creative side of things. Like I know obviously like everyone is saying like prompt engineering is going to be like the next skill, but I didn't think about it that way where if you're a marketer, like you will still need your marketing skills to be able to like somewhat express yourself for
yeah,
it to actually have like an output that actually is what you want. And going back to your point, if everyone is just giving the exact same prompt, have the same algorithm, same model, you're gonna have the same output. So you're gonna clearly know who's doing the exact same thing, who's not being creative, and then the people that actually take it to that next level are going to be the people that learn to like really express themselves clearly. They know how to prompt engineer, they know how to tweak things, make them look better. And I feel those are probably going to be the people that are going to be different. They're going to stand out from like all the other people doing the exact same thing over and over here.
I could not agree more. And that to me, that's where the fun comes in, and
Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier, I am located here in Los Angeles, and we've got a lot of creative people here. And the
Mhm.
entertainment industry has definitely hit a couple bumps lately.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I really do think that, a lot of those creatives, what they're doing for a living, I do think is going to evolve. It's not going to
Mm,
remove the creativity. It's just going to evolve, how they're doing it.
yeah.
I see that as the difference, kind of like how, you know, cinematographers used to just use a camera and that was really all they were using versus now, the people in post-production are coming in and adding in all these different, effects, to
Yeah.
what that cameraman did. So I kind of see that as just yet another evolution, in that whole science of, well, I guess the science of art to a certain extent.
Yeah, so you're probably gonna have a lot of artists turning marketers in LA pretty soon. And those are gonna be the people you hire because of their creativity.
Yeah, I think that is going to happen. It's going to be some fun times.
Perfect. Cool. Well, I really appreciate your time, Chris. And I guess like one of the questions I would have for you, if there's anyone that wants to reach out to you, do you want to like get in touch with you, want to work with you,
Yeah,
what's best way to
you
do so?
yeah, you can definitely go check us out. Our website is www.stauffer, stauffer.com. And if
Mhm.
you want, you can email me at chris@stauffer.com as well.
Active on LinkedIn, any social platforms or
Uh, Pretty much all of them. Definitely very active on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn?
Of
There you
course,
go.
that's probably the easiest way to find me for work.
Perfect. Well, we'll put that in the description. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Zach. It's been a pleasure.